This guitar lesson will be posted on the TrueFire.com website and will be included in a published series for their next top guitar instructor submissions. Student votes combined with judges' scores will determine TrueFire's next top guitar instructor, and final rankings will be posted on their website. So be sure to head over and check out all the postings for the top 10 finalist submissions. Hi, I'm Andrew Wasson from Creative Guitar Studio. Thanks for joining me for another one of my guitar lessons. This time we're going to be discussing how to create an at-home practice schedule so that you can get as good as you can possibly become at your scales. And this was sent in as a question from Matthew. He's in Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA. He wrote in saying, could you run down a really good study routine for a practice system that would be the best for learning how to totally know my scales? A big problem for me is no matter how much I practice my scales, I cannot seem to grab into the notes I want when I'm writing or soloing. Hope you can help. From Matthew in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Well, hey, thanks for writing in, Matthew. You know, when it comes to having success with the at-home practice of scales, it's important to realize that getting good at this is a combination of two things. Now, number one, knowing exactly how you'll approach each day of study by having a solid scale practice routine established. Now, number two, break down your practice sessions so that you have several different scale rehearsal concepts. And to get really good at these two areas, we have to create a daily study workout plan. So let's begin by taking a look at a scale practice routine that I'll often recommend to my own students when it comes to the long road of developing and using scales on the guitar. Well, here we have a very typical scale practice chart that I would probably be giving to one of my own students in class. And you can see here we have our week designated, from October 21st to the 25th. So that's our full week going by. Up at the top of the schedule, we have our our scale schedule. I'll talk about this in just a second. I do want to mention too that this schedule here, I am going to be including it in your download of the material that's going to be associated to this lesson plan. So you will get a copy of this as a Word doc that you'll be able to edit and create your own schedules with at length. So anyway, let's go back to this idea here of why I included the third column on arpeggios. Now, even if you're not really on top of your arpeggio studies at this time, I really want to stress that along with your scale practice, it's really valuable to get going on your arpeggio practice as well. They're so closely related, and especially in the application, obviously scales are being used for improvising, for your composing pre-written lines and so on. The arpeggio is going to play a huge role alongside that. So if you can tie these two in as a regular workout, it's going to be very, very beneficial for you. You can see kind of what I did here. I had this on Monday. I had designated G major scale, and then the corresponding, G major, whether that's triad or major seventh, and then the relative minor as well, the E minor. And you can see what I did as the week progressed. I went through other scales. I had F sharp minor, D Dorian, B Mixolydian on Thursday, C harmonic minor showing up on the Friday's practice. And then we also have all the corresponding arpeggios. You can see them all breaking them down here on the arpeggio schedule side of things. So it's really good work. And basically, as you can see here at the end, the Saturday, Sunday, it's a breakdown where you're having some jamming for fun going on, maybe doing some transcription stuff that's just going to be for good times, or you can take a day off. It's really important to take some time away from the instrument. Otherwise, you'll probably wind up getting a little bit burned out. So keep in mind, 4 or 5 days through the week, that's going to be a fantastic practice schedule. Take Saturday and Sunday off, or just play for fun. And I think you're going to have a very successful workout schedule. So let's head to the guitar next and see how all this corresponds right to the guitar fretboard. Well, now that we know that it is essential that all initial scale work be related to a practice schedule that will move the student through, all of the key signatures and every key and every scale location. You want to rehearse that using that scale routine across all the guitar's fingerboard area on as much of a daily process as you can. Always take a few days off, though, to just balance your entire week out. But in example 1, I have a common 1-octave scale pattern in the key of A major. And the proper rehearsal of this pattern should be approached using a metronome, of course, set to a manageable tempo that you can perform the scale at perfectly in time. I'm not going to be using a metronome for these examples. However, make sure you use one at home. Be sure to count yourself in and to tap your foot in time with the metronome as you practice. I'd like to run through example number 1 right now, though. It's off of the 5th fret of the 6th string, A major. Here we go. Now, all the scale patterns are going to be listed in your handout when you have a chance to start working through all the majors and minors. I think it's really important to start there, and then you can branch out going into the modes and so forth. But just start off with 1 octave. Memorize that, and then you can expand out past that. And then, of course, to all the other locations as well. Now, one of the things that's really important to get into once you start feeling comfortable with your scales is an excellent next step that's called scale sequencing. And when you sequence scale tones, you're using a pattern and keeping it, going through the entire scale and, not letting it evolve into anything else. It's just going to be staying into one type of intervallic movement. The first one I want to show here in the handout, it's going to be labeled as example number 2, is something called third intervals, where you play the first note of the scale and jump to the third, then the second to the fourth, and the third to the fifth, and et cetera, 4, 6, and so on. And so here's what example number 2 sounds like when you play it down. So that's one of them, but I also want to show another that's very popular. It's where you ascend up 3 notes and then double back. So you're going to follow through the scale of degrees going 1, 2, 3, 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 2, and 3, 4, 5, 3, and etc. So here's example number 3 in your handout. It sounds like this. Now, there are a lot of other scale sequencing ideas. It would be really good to check out a guitar player named Don Mock. He's a former GIT instructor from way back, and he's written a lot of material on scale sequencing. He's just phenomenal at just loads of these kinds of patterns, and they are, of course, not only a great technique exercise, but they're just very good for establishing your way around all the fretboard patterns. But next, I'd like to spend a moment discussing the importance of practicing any scale type that you happen to be studying directly from the scales tonic, and being really diligent about that. This is really important for the development not only of the proper scale layouts on the guitar neck, but also for your ears, for your ears to get used to the distances that all of the intervals of the scale tones will constantly align from one interval step to the other. Now, what I want to do is establish this with just demonstrating and showing you something here about how a major scale, if we're going to take a note, let's say a note of D, a major scale is always going to have a major third interval between the root, the tonic of the scale, and the third degree. And that's going to establish its major tonality. So major scales will always have that major third. Minor scales will always have a minor third. So you can hear that. That's that minor color that establishes every type of minor scale. And then there's the major third for the major scales. So you always want to make sure you're coming from the appropriate tonic from the scale that you're practicing. Sometimes teachers will call that the scale's naming note. So if you're in the D major scale, then obviously the tonic, the naming note would be D. And that's what I'm going to use for example number 4, a 5th string root D major scale, to demonstrate how to do this. We're going to play through this properly from the D at the 5th string. We're going to encompass every tone, even doubling back to the tones found on the 6th string, and then we're going to resolve back on the root. So check out in your handout here, it's going to be example number 4. It goes like this. You notice how I doubled back down below and came in to the root once more, firmly establishing that D as the tonal center. Now, after you've made a solid study of all the common in-position scale shapes, another valuable area of scale practice is creating 3-note per string scale patterns. Now, in doing this will require you to execute some fairly large fretboard stretches to cover the scale properly. And in applying the 3-note per string concept, several of the guitar strings will need to have a double whole step reach, like you can see I'm doing here. This is most effectively done using the index, middle, and small fingers of your fingerboard hand. Now I've converted our 5th string tonal center note of D and D major scale layout that we just looked at in example, back in example 4. And we're going to demonstrate here in example number 5 the typical 3-note per string scale operating off that 5th fret D note here, 5th string root major scale. Here we go. It's in your handout as example number 5. Now, if you're perhaps curious as to what exactly is so good about learning these 3-note per string scales, it's all to do with basically speed, playing things faster, especially with legato work. You can do it very quickly with the 3-noter. So it's really a great way to practice the 3-note per string legato technique. And also, when you think about it, this scale format makes playing the fast 16th note triplets a real piece of cake. You can really get them in quite easily. It's all easy to fret, easy to finger that way, because everything's uniform. We're always dealing with 3 notes per string. It's a great thing to practice for your scale layouts. Now, the next scale practice concept I'd like to cover is that of going to work on all of your basic in-position scales and learning several ways to play them so that they interlock across the neck and cover much more of the guitar's fingerboard. Now, this is not only valuable for improvising lines, but it's also extremely helpful for when you're composing melodies as well. Example 6 applies several fretboard shifts to cover a very large area from the 4th all the way up to the 9th fret region. So we're going to cover that in the example number 6 layout of D major scale once again, starting from the 5th fret of the 5th string. So that's just the plain old D major scale. You can see we're position shifting along the neck, and we're really stretching it out to more of an along the neck approach rather than being so much more in position. It's very good to figure out maybe even upwards of a half dozen of these for yourself for almost every scale out there, because they are very helpful for getting you to play more along the neck rather than always being locked into one position. Now, in example 7, I'm focusing here on the 4th mode of the D major scale, making the G note now. I'm going to do it up here at the 12th fret. 3rd string, 12th fret. And what we're going to do is make that G note the starting and resolution tone for a line that covers slightly smaller fretboard range of 9th to 12th position, but it introduces a challenging group of 5 notes that's going to show up on the 1st guitar string. Now in cases like this, fingering options can be one of the most difficult tasks. We're going to be going 9, 10, 12, and then we're going to have to shift even higher, 14, 15, you know. So you want to pick fingers, you know, that feel comfortable. Maybe you want to do some slides just to be able to map it all out. But these kinds of situations do show up once in a while when you're trying to go more along the neck. In this case, we have 5 notes that are, you know, all across that top string. But let me just go to work here and play through example number 7 for you so you can get a bit of an idea on how this thing's getting laid out. So here it is, example number 7. You can just decide on what your favorite fingerings will be for that. And that's the big aspect in practicing this stuff, is to really start determining fingerings when you're doing a lot more of that along the neck work. Now, for my final examples for the practice of scales on the guitar, I'm going to go and place a focus on the study of scale fragments. And this type of scale study is extremely beneficial for gaining a smaller, more localized sense of how scales operate in one of the 3 main regions of the guitar's fingerboard. Now, before we go any further, you may or may not be aware of the fact that our guitar's fretboard can be divided into 3 main regions, and these are based upon the principle that the guitar's range is essentially 5 frets long. This is due to the way the guitar is tuned and how we relocate unison pitches from one string to the next. If we have an F here, 5 frets higher on the next string, we have another F. If we have a tuning concept going on with our guitar, you know yourself that tuning from the 5th fret to the next string open is how that all operates. If I played this G perhaps on the 5th fret of the 4th string, well, 5 plus 5 is 10. On the next string over, down, lower there, 10th fret gives us the exact same G note. Now you can tell the color of it is changed. It's a bit darker and sort of warmer sounding down there, and that's just because the distance of the string and the diameter of the string has changed, but it is the same note. Now, we can practice this easy enough by going and taking scale fragments in one fretboard region, then relocating the fragment over to other areas. Example number 8 is going to be our initial scale fragment from the D major scale from open to 5th fret area, just down here lower on the neck. And we're going to relocate that after we establish it. So here's the initial D major scale fragment phrase. Now that's from open to 5th fret. So we're going to relocate that scale fragment up from example 8, relocated over to our next fretboard region of 5th to 10th, and it's in the handout here as example number 9. So here it is in the next region. It's the same phrase from example number 8. But it's just relocated. So let's do that one more time. So finally, here's the fragment from example 9, relocated over to the next fretboard region of the 10th to 15th fret area. It's in your handout as example number 10. Now, this is an excellent way to really get an understanding, not just how scales move around on the guitar, but also to better understand how phrase can be relocated into other areas of the neck for testing out different tonal relationships and how different fingerings will feel when it comes to performing your lines. Well, you know, anytime a guitarist begins to seriously study a scales practice routine, they need to have a combination of extensive miniature scale projects involved in their plan. This is going to help with properly developing the skills necessary for using the scales very effectively. Now, whether scales are being applied in improvised solos or if they're being used to compose pre-written melodies, guitar players need to be fluid in both the larger full scale patterns as well as smaller scale fragments. And this way, the scale patterns will not only make sense to our fingers on the neck, but also to our ears as well. As our memorization of these shapes and general playing techniques develops, so will our ears. So it's not just a physical playing concept, it's also an ear training element to this as well. And since this is a fairly big topic, we need to really study it in small steps over a fairly long period of time. Anyway, once again, thanks for watching. Have fun working on all this information. You can download the handout and an MP3 jam track for this video over at my website at andrewwasson.com, and you can follow me on Twitter, through Facebook, and on my other guitar blog YouTube channel. The links are all in the description box below. Take care, everyone, and have a great week. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.